pleasure to welcome forward now Rabbi Stephen Morgen, and the title of his teaching tonight, what if the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah was the story of creation? Rabbi Morgen, welcome.
Thank you. And I want to thank all the organizations that helped to put this program together. This is really pretty exciting. So that's the subject of my talk is, what if the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah was the stories of creation? And there's two obvious reasons for thinking that this would be an appropriate Torah reading. But first, let me tell you what I'm not going to talk about. I won't talk about why we selected something else. Chapters 20 and 21 of Genesis were chosen because God remembered Sarah and gave her a child, and then God challenged Abraham to sacrifice that child. Lots of ink has been spilled about those stories and why we're reading them on Rosh Hashanah. That's not what I want to talk about tonight. So instead, what I want to suggest is that the opening chapters of Genesis are, first of all, kind of the obvious choice for Rosh Hashanah for two reasons. First of all, we're changing the calendar year from 5780 to 5781, and Rosh Hashanah, New Year. We're counting years, at least symbolically, back to creation. Our ancestors believed the world was only a few thousand years old. Now we know better. The world is billions of years old. But in any case, our ancestors thought it was only a few thousand years old, and they believed that they could count using the ages of the people listed in Genesis, and they came up to the number 5,781. So Rosh Hashanah represents the new year, counting from the time of the creation of the world. And so wouldn't it be obvious that we should read about the story of the creation of the world on Rosh Hashanah? The second thing is that many people particularly believe that Rosh Hashanah was supposed to represent the sixth day of creation. That is the day on which Adam and Eve were created. Humanity was created. And so it's their birthday. And so if we're celebrating the birthday of Adam and Eve, why don't we read the story about their birthday, which again would be the opening chapters of Genesis. But I'm going to suggest there's actually a deeper reason for looking at these opening chapters of Genesis, that thematically these stories, these creation stories, are necessary in order to really understand what we're trying to do on Rosh Hashanah. Now, some of you may have noticed that I talked about creation stories, and I assume that most of us, maybe all of us, are aware that there's actually two creation stories in the opening chapters of Genesis. They're two very different stories. The first one is chapter 1 of Genesis through the first few verses of chapter 2, and the second one is the rest of chapter 2 and chapter 3. The two stories use different language, and they describe the act of creation in very different terms. So in order to understand why they're both necessary stories and how they both relate to Rosh Hashanah, I want to take a look particularly at the first chapter of Genesis, but then also at the second story, and see what they're trying to teach us. So since I can share a screen, I'm going to share the screen here with, whoops, where's my share screen? Oh no. Hold on one second. Put this up here. Okay. Should have practiced this beforehand, huh? Okay, here we go. There we go. I have a little chart here of creation with the 6 days of creation, ending with the seventh day of Shabbat. God probably didn't light candlesticks, but okay, whatever. First day, God creates light, and he separates light from darkness. And he calls the light day, and he calls the darkness night. And there was evening, there was morning the first day. If you want to see it in the text, we happen to have the JPS translation over here. So I do want to point out also that the earth was originally unformed and void, right? The earth was originally, the whole universe was a primordial soup, unformed mass of, completely disorganized. And the process of creation, as we're going to see, is a process of imposing order on this chaos. And the first thing God needs to do is to turn a light on in the workshop. So he does. He turns on the light, and he separates the light from darkness. Okay, the second day is the most confusing day for modern people. So if you haven't studied this with a Bible scholar before, let me just explain what it says here. God says, let there be an expanse. We don't know what that means. in the midst of the water, that it may separate the water from water. Boy, is that confusing. And God made the expanse, and he separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning a second day. So let's take a look at our picture. What I have over here is a picture of the sky as it appears over the ocean. And you'll notice that there's a little line over here where the ocean meets the sky at the horizon. They're both blue. Ancient people used to think that the sky was blue because it was actually a big pool of water up there. And so then the next question would be, why doesn't that big pool of water fall down on our heads? And the answer is because on the second day, God created the expanse. And so basically you had one giant pool of water, and he took a sheet of plexiglass, clear plexiglass, and inserted it into the water, and the plexiglass lifted half the water up and the other half remained below. So above is water up here and below is water down here. And the thing that's keeping the water from falling on our heads was the expanse that God created on the second day. If you read the story of Noah and the flood with this in mind, it'll make a lot of sense, where it says the windows of the heavens opened up and the water came down, right? So into the plexiglass, God inserted little windows, and when it rains, he opens the windows, and that's what allows the water to fall down. Okay, so that is day number 2. So then day number 3, God separates the water and he creates land, dry land. So here we have the globe, dry land and water. And at the end of day 3, he also creates plants that live on the dry land. Then we're going to go back up to day 4. On day 4, he creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. And some people say, well, gee, if the sun wasn't created till day 4, what was the light over here on day 1? So the answer to that is, again, if you were an ancient person, you spent a lot of times outdoors, and you noticed that when the sun goes down, it's not dark right away. It still stays light for some time before it turns dark. And before the sun comes up in the morning, it's already getting bright outside, even without the sun. And people back then didn't know about refraction of sun rays through the atmosphere of the earth, etc. And so what is causing that light if it's not the sun in the sky? And the answer is, God created a primordial light originally that actually is the thing that separates day from night. And the sun, moon, and the stars are a whole different thing that he created on day 4, right? So now he's got the sun, moon, and the stars. But it's not just that these are lights in the sky. The sun is supposed to rule by day, and the moon rules at night. So you can keep track of the hours of a day, or at least the difference between day and night, by seeing where the sun and the moon are, or at least the sun. The sun tells you when the day is, when sunrise and sunset. Moon doesn't quite follow sunrise, sunset. The stars also, according to the Bible, tell us the seasons. Again, ancient people used to know that the constellations move through the sky over the course of a year. So if they looked up in the sky and they saw a particular constellation, they could kind of tell what time of year it was based on the constellations. These things are very highly defined, sun, moon, and stars, and they help to organize the day. Oh, I forgot to mention also, by the way, when he created plants, each plant recreates itself, right? You don't get tomatoes from carrots. Each carrot reproduces carrots, each tomato reproduces tomatoes, every apple reproduces apples. Very highly defined and distinct kinds of vegetation, each one in its own kind. Then on day 6, God creates birds that fly in the sky and fish that swim in the sea. And finally, on day 7, God creates the animals that live on land and Homer Simpson. Well, Homer Simpson's our stand-in for the human being. So what is the story of creation? Besides the fact that in each case, God is imposing order on chaos and making distinctions and creating rules that that are like laws of nature that they follow, right? So each kind of bird gives birth to only its kind of bird, each kind of fish only reproduces its kind of fish, and so on. Not only is it that kind of distinction, but the structure of it, the reason I put it up here for you to see, is that the structure of this creation is really very cleverly organized. Here on the left side, you have non-movable things. The light goes on, the light goes off, but it doesn't move. Here you have lights that move through the sky, the sun, moon, and stars. Here you have unmovable pool of water above and unmovable pool of water below. And here you have birds that fly up in that high part and fish that swim, that move in the water below, right? So these are movable. And here again, you have earth, which doesn't move. At least our ancient people didn't think it moved. They didn't know about earthquakes and floating masses of earth or whatever. But so the earth doesn't move. Vegetation blows in the wind, but it's rooted in the ground, so it's not going anywhere. On the other hand, land animals move all over the land, right? Left column are static objects. Right column are movable things that move in the medium of these static items. Okay, so this is a very highly structured order of creation. And now, just to add a little bit more to that first story of creation, the process is one of differentiating primordial chaos and establishing order and distinctions, a world that operates according to rules established by one creator. It's not a competition among gods, as many other creation stories would have it. It is not a gods fighting with each other and using human beings as their chess pieces and toys in their fight. There is one God who created everything, and he has a plan, and he organizes the world according to rules that are established that if human beings are clever, they can figure out and understand how the universe works. It's not science as we would understand it today, right? We know the world is more than 5,000 years old. By the way, the sun isn't created until day 4, but plants are created on day 3, so we don't know about photosynthesis. If we were describing creation, the sun would be the first thing created in our solar system, not the heavens, not the earth and the water and so on. But it is science for someone who is maybe living 3,000 years ago. And just as a thought experiment, you might want to ask yourself, if you were God, how would you describe to a human being living 3,000 years ago how you created the world, assuming you know what we know today? Right? That there was a big bang at the center of the universe, an expanding mass, swirling galaxies. One galaxy in particular has one solar system with a spinning mass that turns into a sun with planets surrounding it. And then the earth cools and single-celled organisms appear in the water. And then through the process of evolution, we get all the variations of life on Earth. I don't know how you'd explain that to somebody who lives 3,000 years ago. They wouldn't know what you're talking about. And so the best that they could get from a revelation from God would be, you know what? The world is not a chaotic mess like some other people are saying. It seems pretty unified. It seems pretty organized, like there was only one creator and there's a lot of rules about how the world works and we can figure this out. So it's not science as we know it today, but it's not too bad science for the time it was being written. Notice also that humans are created in the image of God. Now, what does that mean? It could be a physical image. God looks like this, although Judaism has now rejected that idea. So therefore, whatever it is that we're in the image of God, it must be a spiritual or perhaps an intellectual or perhaps a moral image. We have certain aspects of being spiritual beings or being intellectual beings that is superior and different from animals. And we can make moral choices and decisions. We can choose how we want to behave in sort of a semi-godlike way. We are sort of a knockoff version of the ultimate spiritual intellect of the universe. And in that way, perhaps, we are created in the image of, as a sort of a knockoff version of God, not in our physical form, but our spiritual, intellectual, or moral capabilities. And finally, human beings are created to fill the world and subdue it. We're supposed to rule over the fish, the birds, and the land animals, but we're supposed to eat fruits and vegetables. We're vegetarians. At least that's the way God originally created us. We have been given tremendous power as human beings. We're supposed to subdue the earth and conquer it and control it. But as Spider-Man's Uncle Ben always said, with great power comes great responsibility. And so we get the second story of creation. The second story of creation, as you know, God takes a clump of earth and he shapes it into the form of a human being. He blows the breath of life into it, and it becomes Adam. And here is a little play on the words in the Hebrew for those who aren't aware of it or hadn't heard of it before. The word for earth is Adamah, and the word for human is Adam, right? Not an accident. It's a very clever play on words in the Hebrew. One Bible commentator suggested that we should translate Adam as earthling, and thereby capturing the idea that earthling, he is a creature of the earth. In any case, he takes the earth, shapes it into the human form, blows the breath of life into him, and he becomes a living creature. Then he plants a garden called the Garden of Eden, and he places the human being in the garden. And he tells the human being, you can enjoy all the fruits and vegetables you like, but you can't eat the fruit of this one particular tree, this tree of knowledge of good and bad. Don't eat that tree. Don't eat the fruit from that tree. Now you might ask yourself, what kind of parent bakes chocolate chip cookies, puts them in a cookie jar, places the cookie jar on the counter, goes out shopping and tells his or her children, you can have whatever fruits and vegetables you want in the refrigerator, but don't touch the cookies in the cookie jar. What do you think they're going to do when you tell them not to do it? Well, of course, we know what's going to happen. But first, there's only one human being, only one creature in the second story of creation. So God needs to create an Ezer Kenegdo, he says. And tragically, Ezer Kenegdo has been sometimes translated as a helper, an assistant. God is going to create an assistant for Adam. But one of my first Bible teachers taught me that keneged, the Hebrew word keneged, is actually better translated as a counterpart, not a servant. He's going to create a counterpart, a partner for Adam. And so then he goes about creating different animals, and each of the animals Adam names, but none of them could serve as a partner, so God puts Adam to sleep. He takes a portion of Adam, a rib or a side or something, and he fashions a new creature that looks a lot like Adam, and he now has a partner for Adam. Some people suggest, by the way, that Adam was originally a hermaphrodite. That is, he was both male and female, and when God put this Adam to sleep, what he did was he separated the genders so that one was male now and the other was female. One of the things that makes this pandemic so challenging is our desire and even our need to be together, right? God started out by saying it is not good for this human being to be alone. Human beings are social beings. We crave relationships with others, and we crave a special relationship with a life partner if we're able to do that. And those people who are successful in having life partners know what a pleasure that is. It's also a lot of work, but of course, it is a tremendous source of joy and comfort to have somebody who can be there with you through your life. By the way, I should add that now we understand in our movement that a life partner does not have to be someone of the opposite gender. It is not good for a human being to be alone, and if he is attracted to someone of the same gender, then we should allow and rejoice in that relationship. So anyway, he now has a partner, and what happens? The snake seduces the woman to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and she says, this is tasty, and then she turns to her partner Adam and says, why don't you try this out? And he has some, and then God says in Hebrew, Ayecha, where are you? So one question we might ask about that is, why doesn't God know where they are? Of course, God knows where they are. And some people suggest he was not really asking their physical location. He was asking about their spiritual or moral situation. What have you done? So the man confesses that he ate the fruit, but then he says, but it's the woman that you gave me. It's her fault. She told me to eat it. And then, of course, the woman passes the buck on to the snake. Yeah, but the snake is the one who seduced me. I didn't want to eat the fruit, but he made me, right? And this is where you learn that Adam and Eve were really children, because children do this. They don't often own up to their mistakes. They want to blame somebody else. And sometimes even adults do that. We've seen that a lot. Adults blaming other people. This is apparently a human trait that goes back thousands of years. But in any case, they are then all punished. The snake has to crawl in its belly. The woman suffers pain in childbirth. It does say, by the way, that she's supposed to serve her husband. I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. The punishment for the man is that by the sweat of his brow, he will have bread to eat, right? So apparently bread was ready baked in the Garden of Eden, but now he's going to have to till the soil himself and learn how to till it, plant, harvest, grind the grain, knead the dough, and bake it and make it into bread. He's going to have a lot of work that he has to do. So just one thing then about the woman being the subservient to her husband, I just want to point out that, first of all, we have now painkillers so that pain in childbirth can be controlled. Nobody says not to use painkillers in childbirth. At least most people don't say you shouldn't do that. In any case, we now have combines that a man or a woman who is farming a field can sit in an air-conditioned cabin and plow up a whole field and while listening to their favorite music on their phones. And similarly, they can harvest that way. And when they're done harvesting, they can thresh in a machine. And we have machines that bake bread and so on. You can make tons of loaves of bread with very little work. Nobody says we should be tilling the soil with a stick anymore. And so the question is, if the punishment for Adam has been overcome, by the sweat of our brow we'll have bread to eat, and we've overcome the issue of pain in childbirth, why should women continue to have to be subservient to their husbands, right? So anyway, we're dispensing with that problem, and let's go on to the real question, which is, so we get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. We're not going to live forever. We're now mortal, and we don't live in paradise. But the question is, why did God do this in the first place? Why did God create a situation where there's this tree that you're not supposed to eat the fruit? It's almost a foregone conclusion that the human being is going to eat that fruit right from the setup. So what was the purpose of this exercise? And what I'm going to argue is the following. This is my modern midrash on the two stories of creation. The first story of creation is an attempt at science. It says that the world operates according to rules and principles that you can discern and you can understand. The rain comes in its seasons, the mountains are beautiful and glorious, and every creature has a different kind of food to eat. It's a wonderful world, very complicated, very intricate, very highly refined, and all interplays very nicely, woven together in such a nice, beautiful, amazing structure. However, there are problems with the rules. The same principles that give us mountains, in case you don't know, that's caused by earthquakes. The tectonic plates of the earth rubbing against each other cause tremendous earthquakes, and then there's an upshift, and that upshift causes mountains to exist. So if you like climbing mountains, if you like skiing, you can't complain about earthquakes because otherwise you wouldn't have mountains. The same principles that bring rain in their seasons also sometimes bring rains not in their seasons. Or since I'm living in Houston, we're unfortunately painfully aware, sometimes too much rain comes in its season, and then you have a flood. So the same principles that work beautifully 98% of the time occasionally cause damage, cause bad things to happen to good people. What is God going to do about that? Well, if God doesn't have a body, which modern Judaism assumes, God cannot reach out a hand when this gravity, let's say, pulls things down. It keeps us grounded, literally grounded on earth, right? But the same principle of gravity, if you're mountain climbing and you slip, that same principle will cause you to crash to the ground and get injured or worse, right? God can't create a hand to scoop you up and put you back on the mountaintop. And by the way, if something like that did happen, you'd probably have a heart attack afterwards and die anyway. But God doesn't do that. God doesn't have a hand. He can't violate the laws of nature. If God violates the laws of nature, there are no more laws of nature anymore. They only apply when God lets them apply. And when somebody falls off a mountain, if it's Mother Teresa who falls off the mountain, and he says, "Oh, I got to save Mother Teresa." The next person who falls off the mountain, God says, "Well, is this person as good as Mother Teresa? Not quite as good. Do I save this person? Do I not?" Imagine the complications that God would have trying to decide when to interfere with the laws of nature. So God doesn't.
Rabbi Morgen, sorry to interrupt you. It's Rabbi Leiter just doing a 5-minute time check. Thanks.
Good. Great, thank you. We're almost done. So we have these rules of nature that the world operates under. So the problem that God has is he's going to solve this problem by creating a creature with free will that can think for itself, think outside the box, and that can come up with new ideas and new ways of ruling the world, and also has opposable thumbs so that he can manipulate the world around him. And by taking this creature, he can inspire this creature to solve the problems that a scientific world creates. So that the 2% of the time when the world doesn't work, this creature can figure out ways to alleviate the suffering when it happens, and maybe sometimes even prevent the suffering before it happens. But he has to have free will. And so now God has to run an experiment to see if this creature has free will. So he instructs this creature, don't eat the fruit from that tree, and then he waits to see what happens. And like a good scientist, he's running this experiment, and sure enough, the creature eats the fruit, proving it has free will, that necessary ingredient to be God's partner in the world. So that's why we need both of these stories. If we didn't have free will, the rest of the Bible would make no sense. The rest of the Bible is trying to train human beings to literally be God's hands and feet in solving the problems that a scientific world creates, in trying to create a world that is kind and compassionate, fair, honest, and just. In short, we are supposed to bring goodness into the world. We're literally God's hands and feet to bring God's goodness into the created world. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. It's about reaffirming our role in the universe, that we're supposed to be trying to do God's will in the world to make this world a better place for everyone, and be true to our mission. And so now if I can borrow another phrase from Spider-Man, this time from his girlfriend, Mary Jane. On Rosh Hashanah, let's not just pray all day long. God wants us to change the world. What are we waiting for? Go get him, Tiger.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Morgen. Shana Tova to you. Thank you for your Torah teaching this evening.